Welcome to the talk History from Things, Rewriting Early Chinese History with Inscribed Objects and Other Material Culture. My name is Anthony Barbieri-Low, and I teach at the University of Pittsburgh. In his classic study of the archaeology of early American life, entitled In Small Things Forgotten, anthropologist James Dietz looked at the material culture remains of the American colonists to find out how they really lived. He argued that the picture of early American life derived from diaries, court records, and 19th century romanticizing texts gave a distorted and in some ways untrue picture of the colonial American past. The written record of many cultures tends to present a fragmentary and biased picture of the past. Often that view is filtered through the lenses of elite male authors and does not address many of the subjects we modern scholars are actually interested in. We often treat texts as information mines, from which we hope to dig up facts, whereas the texts themselves were not created for that purpose. Oftentimes they actually embody arguments, discourses that present the particular worldview and political stance of their author. The study of objects, history from things, provides one avenue of fruitful research to at least partially surmount the problem of textual bias. James Dietz concludes in the final chapter of his book that, quote, material culture may be the most objective source of information we have. By looking at objects buried or carelessly tossed away, we can penetrate some of the smokescreen created by the fragmentary and biased textual record. However, one need not, and in fact should not, disregard received texts in the pursuit of knowledge of the past. Objects and inscriptions can be used productively in conjunction with received historical texts in at least three ways. As is done most frequently, especially in interpretive museum exhibits, archaeologically recovered material culture can be used to illustrate events and trends known from the textual record. Second, objects can fill in the gaps of the historical record, illuminating forgotten events or recounting the lives of groups in society normally left out of elite texts. Finally, archaeology can be used to correct or revise our picture of the past, a past too often distorted by the very texts we rely on for our common understanding. I would like, in this brief talk, to look at two assemblages of archaeologically recovered objects from early China to see how they can shed new light on old historical problems and lift the elite male-biased screen drawn by Confucian writers. Historical narratives, essays, and poetry from early Imperial China lead us to believe that the settled agriculturalists on the Yellow River Valley were locked in a Manichaean struggle with the nomadic pastoralists who lived to the north of the heartland of Chinese civilization, the most famous group of which are the Xiongnu. Because of the fundamental difference in their subsistence base and the diametrically opposed culture and belief systems that grew out of that base, this was, it is said, a life and death struggle between two different worlds. From these elite texts, we only hear of mutual hostility, raiding, kidnapping, extortion, massacre, and extreme cultural polarization. Much modern scholarship has focused on the military conflict between these groups and the frontier dynamics that led to such monumental defensive constructions as the Great Wall of China. But recent archaeological finds are beginning to reveal a more interesting picture, demonstrating a degree of economic and cultural integration between these diverse ecological and cultural zones, and even revealing cases of peaceful accommodation at the ground level. So let us get to the ground level, or, to be more precisely, the below-ground level. In 1999, archaeologists performed a salvage excavation on a late Warring States tomb in the northern suburbs of Xi'an. The 5-meter-deep tomb shaft that you see here, with the burial situated in a side room, was in many ways unremarkable. It was a typical 3rd century BC Qin-style burial. A few ceramic pots with offerings filled a small niche in the northern wall, but no caches of jades, gilded bronzes, nor manuscripts on bamboo or silk were to be found in the tomb chamber. What makes this tomb remarkable is that it belonged to a craftsman, a metalsmith to be exact, and that we know from a small bronze seal found in the coffin near his head that his name was probably Cang. We know that Cang was a bronze caster because many of his tools and the clay casting models that he used in his craft were placed within his wooden coffin, surrounding him on all four sides. And here you see in the plan here between the numbers 15 and the numbers 27 here, all around the figure laying on his side, were these models. 25 ceramic models actually were found in the coffin of bronze caster Cang. Carefully created through techniques of carving and incision, these were the master models that would be used to create secondary ceramic molds for casting objects in bronze or possibly gold. These models were probably indispensable to the livelihood of bronze caster Cang, for some of the pieces had been repaired after significant wear or breakage. In the repertoire of bronze caster Cang, we find components of standard Warring States period Chinese material culture. There were models for casting the metal components for horse carriages, crossbow trigger mechanisms, and legs for bronze tripods, like the one seen here. At the upper right, you see a line drawing of the model found in bronze caster Cang's tomb, and at the lower left, we see an actual Qin bronze from another tomb, but which has a very similar shaped leg that would have been made by a model like this. Also in bronze caster Cang's tomb, we find the model for making what is a typical goose-footed lamp of the Qin and Han period. And here you see at the left again the model from the tomb, and at the right a bronze example very similar in shape to the kind this mold would have made. But within the same cache of models from the coffin of bronze caster Cang, we also find 5 models for making small decorative bronze plaques, like the one seen here, with the horse with its hindquarters twisted up and this band of bird-headed figures along the top. It is thought that many of these small bronze plaques once adorned the leather belts of horse-riding nomads who lived in the area north and west of the Qin state during the second half of the first millennium BC. Such plaques frequently contain scenes of paired animals or animal combat, or the horses with the twisted hindquarters as we saw here. Here is another remarkable model from the tomb of bronze caster Cang. Here we see what looks like a woman, probably a Xiongnu woman in her standard garb, with her arms around an adolescent male child who appears to be playing with what looks like either a pumpkin or a soccer ball. As such, it is probably our only depiction of what a Xiongnu female would have looked like. And here we see an example of how these bronze plaques would have actually been worn. Here from the Maochingo Cemetery in Inner Mongolia, we see around this skeleton the remains of the leather belt with the bronze plaques floating free. The 2 main plaques here at the center were the ones that joined up at the front of the waist, and those were the ones that were created by the more intricate molds that we found in bronze caster Cang's tomb. Now it appears that what we have here is the case of an artisan who was comfortable working in 2 different regional traditions of bronze work and catering to 2 clienteles. He could make typical Chinese products for his metropolitan clients at the Qin capital, but could also make products sensitive to the needs and tastes of the pastoral nomads that lived in the Ordos area north and west of the Qin capital. Adding this observation to the work of path-breaking scholars like Emma Bunker, we can now see that many of the intricate bronze productions of the 5th to 3rd centuries BC found in the so-called northern zone were actually made by Chinese craftsmen, much in the same way that the masterpieces of Scythian art seem to have been made by Greek craftsmen living north and east of the Black Sea. Qin craftsmen like bronze caster Cang probably did not just produce any random design and hope to market it to nomadic patrons. Since bronze belt plaques contain heraldic emblems that Bunker argued were clan-specific, the Qin craftsmen might have been creating these plaques to specific orders from patrons. Thus we begin to see a very different picture of the 3rd century BC frontier, one of mutually beneficial commerce and interaction, part of what some scholars have called the Sino-steppe consumer network. It was only when the ambitions of kings, chieftains, and generals incited conflict, which also induced famine, that the borderlands became highly polarized, and the us and them dichotomy we see in Qin and Han texts became the prevailing discourse. But perhaps the common people on the ground, like bronzecaster Cang, shared a more pragmatic and accommodating view toward life and work across a multi-ethnic frontier. Let us leave bronzecaster Cang to his eternal rest and concern ourselves with issues of gender and women's work. The idealizing gender myth promulgated by male and female elite authors and Confucian moralists of early imperial China was that men plowed, while women reared children, prepared food, and practiced sericulture, silk raising, in their spare time. Men concerned themselves with issues outside the home, whereas women engaged in their labors within the house. Archaeological finds, inscribed objects, and excavated legal texts are challenging this tidy domestic picture as well, and demonstrating that even the supposedly traditionalist early Chinese imperial state had few qualms about employing female artisans in official workshops. In fact, according to the Han legal statutes, the state maintained a standing quota in which conscripted adult female artisans were preferred to male or child artisans in a ratio of 2-to-1. The majority of these women artisans appear to have been employed in textile production and lacquer painting. Because lacquer vessels made at the capital and in regional workshops were frequently inscribed with the name and native place of the artisans who made the piece, we actually know more about women in the lacquer industry than in any other craft field. Dozens of lacquer vessels excavated from the late Qin and early Han period tombs in present-day Yunmeng County, Hubei, carry brands and inscriptions that tell us where they were made and who made them. The phrases Ting or Xian Ting had been fire-branded on the cores of many of the Yunmeng pieces, demonstrating that they were produced under the supervision of the market officials of Xianyang, the capital of the state and empire of Qin, near present-day Xi'an City. In addition to the official marketplace brands, many pieces were also needle-incised with the names of the artisans who painted the final lacquer coatings and decorative patterns. These needle incisions were often on unobtrusive places of the vessel, such as the bottom of the bowl you just saw on the previous slide. Here we see the needle-incised inscription. The given names of the artisans incised into the finished lacquers are prefixed by the age category or rank of the artisan, and sometimes by the name of their native village. It is interesting to note that the vast majority of the named artisans on these pieces are either girls or women. Girls' names occur most frequently on the simple-to-execute eared cups, and not on the more complex toiletry boxes or stacked cup sets. One inscription by a boy with the name of Beggar suggests that the workshop foreman may have pulled boy and girl orphans right off the street to employ in these workshops. The name of adult females were by far the most common on the Qin lacquers. In fact, 2 or 3 named women may have been responsible for making or decorating most of the lacquers imported into the Yunmeng area and later found in the tombs at Shuihudi and Dafengtou. One of these versatile and prolific lacquer painters was a woman we know only as Woman Ao, Da Nuzi Ao. And you see here her inscription on the bottom of that bowl. Judging by the full form of her workshop signature, her residential registration was in Huan Village, a hamlet probably located somewhere near the Qin capital of Shenyang. Her given name, Ao, the last character shown here in this inscription, is not a common one among the known names for women in early imperial China, and carries the connotations of sturdy horse or stubborn and resolute. It was the given name of a famous Qin minister-in-general, Meng Ao, who would have been a contemporary of Woman Ao's parents or grandparents. Now, Woman Ao was certainly resolute and versatile in her production. Among the 81 lacquers found in tomb number 1 at Dafengtou, she signed at least 23 of them, including 5 different types of vessels. The small bowl shown on the screen is decorated in all black on the exterior, but the interior is occupied with an array of geometric bands in the upper registers and a swirling constellation of dragon, bird, and cloud forms at the base. The design displays a liveliness and spontaneity that belies its programmed modularity. It is a skilled production, but certainly not a masterpiece. The lacquered object in this slide is a wine cup holder, also made or decorated by woman owl. She signed both the lid and the individual cups with her needle-incised inscription. Her artistry and technical skill are obvious, but what is much more difficult to discover is the professional and social standing of woman owl. Some of the pieces she signed also carry official marketplace brands on their cores, like on this stacked box set, suggesting that she made them under official supervision. And here, very briefly, we see the inside of that box for holding stacked wine cups. But though some of her pieces had these official brands, many carried just her signature, like the bowl we saw at first. This configuration suggests that woman owl carried out her work in two different locations. Her primary work location was probably in a private lacquer workshop in Huan Hamlet near Shenyang. Occasionally, though, she was conscripted along with other lacquer artisans to labor in the official workshops supervised by the Shenyang market officials. We cannot know for certain, but it is doubtful whether she was the chief proprietress of the Huan Village private workshop. She probably worked alongside other members of her family in a joint enterprise or alongside other hired women artisans under a master artisan or shop owner. Judging by these Qin period inscriptions, women were substantially represented in the privately run and government-supervised lacquer workshops of the capital. Like embroidery, lacquer painting was an intricate, detail-oriented activity that may have favored a smaller, more agile hand. It is also possible that government officials and private patrons simply favored the style of those designs produced by female artisans. Han period quality control inscriptions from more than a century later point to an even broader role for some women in imperial lacquer workshops, at least during the Western Han period. Like the Qin official marketplace lacquers, Han imperial lacquers carried mandated inscriptions naming the artisans who made the object. And here on this wine cup, which is actually flipped upside down, you see an inscription running entirely along the base, 70 words in all. More elaborately, the Han pieces also named the officials and clerks at the factory who supervised production. Of the dozens of different artisan names found on extant Han imperial lacquers, many are androgynous and could be construed as belonging to either male or females. Some names, however, undoubtedly belong to women artisans. A woman who went by the shop name of Mu Fang, Mother Fang, worked in the higher status position of Hua Gong, design painter, in the years around 85 BC at the Western workshop of Shu, the imperial luxury goods factory in Chengdu. Alongside Mother Fang, on the same work crew, sat an artisan named Mang Liu, Rushes and Willows, likely another female. Mang Liu served in the inferior status position of base coat lacquerer, Xiugong, and may have been a junior apprentice. A woman called Yi Wan, Auntie Wan, worked as a lacquer painter at the tribute workshop at the capital in 28 BC. There were probably many other women working in these Han factories, but their gender disappears beneath the more rigid naming conventions of later decades, when only a single graph was used to identify each artisan. It is curious to note that women artisans were only mentioned in conjunction with painting in the lacquer workshops. No woman's name has ever been discovered among the core carvers or gilders. One further exceptional case demands attention, however. In 85 BC, the Western workshop of Shu employed a woman called Mother Yi, Mu Yi, as a foreman clerk, Ling Shi. This was not an artisan position at all, but entailed scribal and accounting functions requiring fairly high levels of literacy. In addition, the Yi in Mother Yi's name is a common graph denoting non-Han ethnic groups to the northeast and southwest of Han China. Thus it seems doubly remarkable that not only would a government factory employ a woman in a scribal position of great responsibility, but a non-ethnic Han woman at that. Women were not allowed to become officials in the civilian bureaucracy, so it would have been impossible for Mother E to pursue her bureaucratic career outside the insulated world of her factory in Chengdu. You could say that she had hit the lacquer ceiling in her occupation. A very tangible representation of the prevalence of women artisans can be seen in the image I used as the title page for my talk. Looted from a tomb of a noble or royal from South China dated to the Han period, this group of 21 painted terracotta figurines represents the male and female artisans that worked for the tomb occupant during his or her lifetime. Each artisan figurine is inscribed on the chest with their occupational specialty and sometimes their personal name. Many of the inscriptions have fallen away, but one can still read titles like painter, illustrator, and crossbow maker. As you can probably tell, nearly half of the artisans represented here are women. The woman in the front and center was a shoemaker, and her name was Yo. In summary, it should be quite clear from the evidence adduced above that the idealized concept of the stay-at-home wife was a status symbol of the elites in Qin and Han society. As today, the families of the working classes could not afford this luxury and utilized whatever labor at their disposal to earn a living. We are conditioned by textual sources to expect that early Imperial Chinese workshops should have been male domains, but this view is only an idealizing smokescreen, obscuring a far more interesting social reality. Some workshops, such as those for building construction and metallurgy, do appear to have been mostly male enterprises, but others, such as lacquer and textile shops, appear to have been mixed-gender environments with a strongly female component. If Qin and Han laws had not mandated that artisans like Woman Ao and Mother Fang affix their names to their products to assume final responsibility for their work, we may never have known this. The textual record of early China is very rich in historical narratives, philosophical texts, and refined literature. While this canon of texts will continue to inform us greatly, the greatest voice of revelation for the field has been coming from archaeology. Excavated texts, settlement sites, graves, and tomb furnishings inspire the field of early China more so than for any other period of study in Chinese history. And while these new discoveries have not overturned the basic narratives of the Chinese past, they do provide a window through which we can see lost details, obscured relationships, and most importantly, see how the forgotten ones really lived. I will reiterate the conclusion that Dietz writes so eloquently at the conclusion of In Small Things Forgotten. Quote, "The written document has its proper and important place, but there is also a time when we should set aside our perusal of diaries, court records, and inventories, and listen to another voice." Thank you very much for listening and viewing this presentation.